Hello YouTube, this is Morgan Airspeed Prime here with my next Sword Art Online light novel review. This one is going to be for Sword Art Online Progressive Volume 8. So, I think the official release date for this isn't until it's either tomorrow or it's next week, but either way. My copy arrived earlier on today. Read it, let's go through this and talk about it. So, Volume 8 of Progressive is basically Floor 7, Part 2. So, Volume 7, which was the last Progressive volume I reviewed, covers them arriving on Floor 7, and surprisingly not that much else extra. They set up, the whole casino dynamic and the kind of betting on monster fights. That's sort of basically where the casino is, what the casino's all about. Few other little bits and pieces, bringing Kismel in, Argo's here, but for the most part, I felt that this was probably the weakest Progressive so far, because it was so clearly the setup, so clearly a Part 1, and not even a Part 1 that has that much interesting stuff in it. Thankfully, Volume 8 delivers on sort of the setup from Part 1, because it has way more action, significant scenes, kind of twists, and it just in general I think comes together a little bit better. It still probably wouldn't be my favorite sort of just story from Sword Art Online, just because with Progressive I like the Elf War quest line, I like the early setup for the Laughing Coffin stuff, and while a lot of the characters that we really care about are involved here, there are definitely times when just those characters interacting with sort of the gimmick on each floor sometimes doesn't work as well. And so I'm definitely hoping as the volumes progress that we are not just sort of stuck in a situation where every floor has to be 2 volumes or more. I'm okay with it for sort of significant floors. I think we're all expecting maybe floor 10 to be relatively significant. So if he has to devote 2-3 volumes there, fair enough. But say after that, does floor 11 need to be that big of an event? Perhaps not. Now, by the end of this, it's sort of clear that, okay, he's setting these places up to be places we can go back to if needed. Because there's a very kind of interesting plot point that happens at the end of this book that doesn't quite get resolved, which makes it clear that Kirito is going to have to come back to this floor at some point just for a little bit of resolution on everything that's going on here. But overall, I definitely much preferred Volume 8 to Volume 7. It kind of makes me want to go back to Volume 7 and kind of look through some of the parts with the kind of new NPC characters and kind of see were there little hints and things like that I maybe missed. But I do feel it is more of a case where it is just this book actually, once it properly gets going, does get into more of the meat of the story. Because even this book I still think takes until about the halfway point to really properly get going. It felt a little bit slow in the first quarter, picked up from pages 50 to 100, and then the last 100 pages were pretty just boom 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 action, and it worked. So yeah, there's definitely some good moments here that I think fans are going to enjoy. Even just looking at, say, the color pages here, finally getting the kind of casino scene and seeing Kirito and Asuna have to dress up to be high rollers at the casinos, kind of a very fun scene. We get a bit of a beach scene towards the end. This was sort of the setup at the start that, oh, the casino has a beach, but it's a private beach that you have to sort of win passes to. We finally do get that at the end. We do get a boss fight here, but it's very brief right at the end of the volume. So there's that as well. And just in general, because we've got, say, Kirito, Asuna, Argo, Kismel is here, but, she doesn't feel like she necessarily, needed as such to be here. There's moments where it's just kind of okay, she has a little bit more knowledge about the sort of lore of the world than other characters, so she has her uses, but it's not she super stands out here. The Elf War quest line gets a little bit of attention as we go through the volume, but it's again more setting up that floor 8 floor 8's going to actually have some relatively significant stuff with that, and that floor 8, floor 9 are going to be, I suppose, when we properly go into L4 quest line, and floor 10, I guess, will be probably the first time a boss fight is actually truly dangerous in a long time. That's at least my guesses for where things are actually heading. But for more of a kind of a recap sort of review discussion style thing, like I said, the book opens up the kind of cliffhanger ending that I thought was not particularly great from the last volume, was that we basically did like the first, like, say, 2 stages of the quest here, and we ended right as Kirito was literally just about to do this thing where he's got the sort of like kind of he's going to like investigate what's going on with the other side of the family that runs the casino, and the monsters that they capture to use in the animal fights that people bet on. What's going on with them, because they figured out that they're using a very high level version of a monster, but painting it as if it's the lower level version, and so Kirito goes to investigate that, and that's what kind of happens here. He looks around, he sees the animals, he actually witnesses the guards there painting the animal red, and he realizes that, oh, they kind of are abusing the animal as well. It's just finished up its fight from before. It already has relatively low health, and they whip it, and it also is losing health slowly, and Kirito realizes that the red dye they put in its fur to make it look red is actually poisoning it, because they have to use a poison to make it look the right shade of red. So Kirito makes this sort of almost random decision to, I feel a kind of connection here that I can't just let this monster die at the hands of this like animal cruelty situation. So he decides he wants to save this monster. So there's a bit of an escape scene as he puts a bag over his head to mask his identity, and basically grabs this monster and kind of runs out. There's not too much to say here. He uses a few of his skills nicely to evade people, because he doesn't want to kill people here, because he's not sure how exactly that's all going to work out. But he eventually gets away. He contacts basically Argo, Asuna, everyone, to be like, hey, the dye remover that we're making here to try and out what's happening with the scam at the arena, bring it now. We need to cure this. And so this is where I suppose we properly, I think, begin to characterize the 2 NPC characters from the first volume. I don't remember really talking about them much when I reviewed Volume 7, because they literally just felt like basic quest givers. And sure, there was a bit of a story about the history of like 2 families owned the casino. Kirito is effectively doing a quest for one side of that family. But we actually begin to develop these characters a little bit more because of the events that happen here. So Kyo is the kind of maid assistant to the family head they're working for. She kind of comes out there, and you get a little bit more of her kind of dynamic with them, of like, she's a little bit more kind of serious, but she does have a bit of a lighthearted side to her. So it's interesting to see the moments when sort of some of Kirito's weird actions do actually kind of make her laugh a little bit. And she goes from being rather sort of terse with everyone to actually opening up quite heavily with everyone. So she has a nice little bit of an arc, even though she's not like a hugely like important or significant character. But the result of this is basically they discover once they get the red dye off this animal is that it's a silver version of this animal, and its name is actually revealed to not be the rusted Lycon. It's actually the storm Lycon. So actually a very, very powerful creature, and they heal it. They get it back up to full health basically, and they're wondering like, okay, is it going to attack us? Because there's a bit of a discussion here. Like Kyo tells Kirito like, this is a bit weird. I don't really know why you're doing this. It is a monster, so I understand your logic here of you want to save it from cruelty and being killed in this way. But if it does attack you at full health, will you defend yourself and try to kill it? And Kirito is ultimately like, yes, I will. But it actually just runs off. Now, the only real reference to this is that it's basically right at the end of the book. The book basically alludes to the idea that, oh, off in the distance, he can see 2 silver Lycons. So, highlighting that they're doing okay, and I guess he has a little bit of a dynamic there. I think I know what they're going for with some of the plot points connecting together, but we'll get to the whole Kirito thing and what happens to him in the book as we go on. So they have to return back and obviously reveal that obviously Kirito on a stealth mission kind of made a bit of a fuss, but he convinces them that they don't know who did this, but now the family that has been messing up things by, putting out the cheat sheets and then altering the result of the final fight, they now have to change things because they don't have their like fake animal anymore. So this creates a situation where our other character, let me get the other volume to get her name right, because it's one thing reading it every so often, saying it out loud for like the first time. Nurnir. Again, this is volume 7. So these are the two characters I'm referring to. So we have the maid here, Kyo, and then the actual family head, Nurnir. So Nurnir basically gets into contact with the other family head and is like, okay, while you figure out what you're going to do, we're going to need to do an inspection, because they have agreed upon terms to how the animal fights work. They each supply one animal and they fight each other. There's 5 rounds. So this sets up the sort of second quarter of the book, is basically the preparation for this kind of inspection where they're going to go to the other families where they're keeping all the animals. Basically where Kirito just was, freeing the animal. There's a little bit of a dynamic where like Kirito, they joke about how Kirito, the only clothing he has is his normal black sort of combat outfit, and then the clothes he wears that he sleeps in, and that he only ever wears black. So they're kind of like, okay, if you're going to come with us to this thing, you're going to need to wear like more normal, suitable clothing. So Nurnir gives Kirito some of her father's clothing. So that sort of solves that. I don't think there's any visuals of Kirito in this clothing or anything like that, but they just highlight that for now, that's what he's wearing. A bit of a joke about the whole, he always wears black. But they go to this, and again, they're investigating it. They're trying to figure out what exactly is going on here. But the net result of this is it relates to something Kirito saw temporarily at the start, which was that he did see this snake next to the cage that the Lycon was in. And the snake, when he saw it, it said it was called like the Argent snake. He at this point realizes that, okay, what's going on here? The snake seems to be in a different cage. Previously, it was in a cage definitely couldn't get out of, but now it's in a cage where it actually probably could slip through the bars. And he doesn't realize the significance of the name, because of course, this is where the whole reveal comes out that the people he's been working for, like Nurnir, hasn't told him something very, very important about herself. So what actually happens here is that she gets basically attacked and more or less bitten by this snake. And this causes a big panic. They have to get out of there. Effectively, they really quickly do get out of there. But Nurnir is in a bad way. And they're all kind of wondering why. So the reveal comes out that obviously Argent snake, the word Argent more or less is sort of like silver in a different language. And the reveal comes out that Nurnir is actually a vampire. So silver obviously is traditionally one of the things that is a weakness for vampires. And through this, we do get sort of in SAO vampires. Yes, they are not good in the sun. Yes, the silver, it obviously damages them. And in this case, she has got sort of silver snake venom. So she's been super directly poisoned by this. It hasn't just touched her. She is on the verge of dying here as well. They do get across that vampires do need to drink human blood to survive. They are effectively immortal, which is why she still looks so young, even though they describe that she's been the leader for like 300 years, I think, later on in the book. The solution that basically comes out here is that there's no way to immediately just heal her with like healing or anything like that. Even the healing crystal, which they bring up, again, this was a plot point from the last volume, the healing crystal won't work here because it won't cancel out this sort of almost like magical weakness strength dynamic here that's at play. Similarly, her just getting human blood also won't fix this problem. What she needs is dragon blood. They highlight here that vampires can either have sort of little bits of human blood quite regularly to survive, or dragon blood every so often to survive. So Nirnir has taken the approach of only, I think, getting like a little bit of dragon blood like once a week, but they don't really have much left or enough to cancel out the poison. She actually needs like a big dosage of dragon blood to get rid of this kind of poison debuff. So Kyo, I think, makes the decision at this point that to give them the most possible time to save Nirnir, they basically have to put her into sort of a kind of coma. So Kyo basically poisons Nirnir with a kind of sleeping poison that I guess would kill a normal person by sort of putting them to sleep forever. But because vampires have natural poison resistance, it just puts her into sort of a coma that will limit the effect of the silver for now. But they still only have 2 days is I think the time limit. So they do establish that they can get dragon blood because guess what? The floor boss here, floor 7, is a dragon. So that sets up that we're going to need to do that eventually, and that brings a lot of characters into play. We're going to need Lind and Kabao, both of their raid teams, guilds together to do this. But before that, we do need to get the sword. Now, this is the thing that was in the casino. It is the ultimate prize of the casino, that if you get, what is it, like 100,000 coins in the casino, you can get the legendary sword, which they do reveal is basically vampire related. I forget the exact kind of timeline of things, but it is established that this is the sword that Nirnir's grandfather used, and it was his sword. He was also a vampire, so there's a significance to it. It is actually as powerful as it is said to be. So this is where we get this first stage of the plan, which is, okay, we need the sword, and the sword will also help us to potentially in the future resolve the growing tensions between the Dragon Knights Brigade and, you know, the two main big guilds at this point in time. And so this is where we get the whole scene here where Kirito and Asuna go in their kind of fancy outfits. So they go in like this, high rollers. They go in with like, what is it, 200,000 of the currency in the game. 50,000 from Asuna, 50,000 from Kirito, 50,000 from Kismao, and 50,000 from Argo. Wait, I forget the exact details of this. I think Kismao wants to help, but it's actually Kyo who I think gives 50,000 of it. I forget it. I lost track of it a little bit, but either way, this is how they get the initial amount of coins to bet on the matches. So from the previous volume, we get the idea that there's this cheat sheet that is put around the place. And it's basically established here, they go into detail on it, that the other family that is cheating at this puts out this cheat sheet on their own. So effectively, people will, almost by default, bet successfully on the first 4 matches and be on a winning streak. And then the 5th one, if they bet, will pretty much guarantee them to put them over the 100,000 threshold to win the ultimate prize. But they'll always kind of rig the last match so that the big bets lose. So initially they're kind of thinking that, like, what if we just get the 2 guilds to just bet either side? That way someone has to win. But they realize they probably can't organize that effectively enough. So they'll have to go in themselves and actually win it themselves. So basically it goes as planned. The first 4 matches they win. And regardless of what way, you know, the betting goes and stuff like that, if they bet on the right one, they will get over 100,000. So this is where the full truth comes out here in terms of, okay, so in this case, it is actually the situation, because they're working with Litten and Shibata in the background, who are kind of telling them what the two guilds are doing. So they inadvertently end up getting this situation where, like, okay, if we don't win, at least one of the guilds will have the fancy sword for the final battle. So what's going to happen here? Someone's going to win regardless of what way this final match goes. And so it actually ends up being quite an even match. It looks like one of the monsters has the slightest of slight advantages in the fight, but all of a sudden the tide shifts, and Kirito was very clear that, like, this one had the clear advantage, but now it's shifted back and forth. But then it keeps happening, and they begin to figure out that, like, oh wait, the lighting is a little bit different. Asuna notices that two of the lights are just sort of normal, and then two of the other ones have maybe, I think it's a green, like, tinge to the light. And Kirito figures out that, oh, they are shining this green different light on whichever monster has the advantage. And immediately afterwards, that monster begins to sort of slow down and weaken. And they kind of figure out that, like, okay, it's a light with, like, a weakening effect. But then they're kind of like, but the fight is even. Why are they doing this? And they figure out that, oh, part of the rules here are that if the match ends in a tie, so both monsters kill each other at the same time, the house gets the money. And so the family member who's organizing this gets the money. No one wins anything. All bets lose, effectively, because no one's going to bet on a tie. So Kirito and Asuna act sort of quickly, and what do? They get out the betting pens, and they kind of quickly get behind cover and just, like, launch the pens at the spotlights that are doing the weakening effect to knock them out, and pretty quickly escape. They look back just enough to see that they do actually win. The one they bet on does win, so they themselves have the money to buy the sword, which they do later go on to do. So that's kind of like the first stage of the plot. And in a way, from the stuff set up from Volume 7, there is sort of effectively your resolution to things. So after this, they buy the sword. In doing so, they also get the passes to the beach. So that is something that's good as well. They get that. And then pretty much they head off to the labyrinth, which is in a kind of dragon bone region of the map. The main things that happen here are that they camp out in the labyrinth as they kind of fight their way up to the boss room. Right before they're about to go in, they sort of sleep just before they go in. Eagle's group, the Bro Squad, arrives. So we have, our initial group of main characters are joined by them. And then the two guilds, which were due to arrive a bit later, actually arrive a little bit ahead of time, because Argo sort of teases them with the idea of, like, hurry up or we'll beat the boss without you. So we end up having, sort of like 4 teams effectively. So we have the Bro Squad, Dragon Knights Brigade, Kabao's group, I forget the name of at the moment, the one that goes on to be the Aincrad Liberation Army, and then Kirito, Asuna, Argo, Kismel, and Kyo goes into the boss room with Nirnir, who is dying, of course. So I think they say at the start, like, she has like 20% health left, but it's going to diminish quite quickly over the course of the fight. But they need to be there so that the second the boss is defeated, they can give the dragon blood to Nirnir. So that's why they're kind of, in a way, putting her at risk. But Kyo is going to, for the most part, stay out of the battle. The fight is not focused on too much. It's basically one of those ones where, like, if you were described as the difficulty of this one, it would maybe be like a 6.5 or a 7 out of 10 in terms of difficulty. It has 6 health bars. It's pretty much just a straight up fight that isn't that much different than the beta. It's kind of similar to the first floor boss fight in that the only thing that seems to be obviously different is the final attack pattern. So otherwise, it's just a grounded dragon who has, like, fire breath attacks and dragon's gaze. So they note that it's this thing where when its eyes start to glow, if you are below level 20 and you witness this, you are stunned for a few seconds. Now, this doesn't affect a lot of the main characters, because Kirito and Asuna are over level 20, say Kabao, Lind, Aegel are over level 20, so they're all okay. But a lot of the main body of the force that they have here will be affected if this actually happens. So everything's going pretty well overall. Kirito has established this sort of thing where he basically says, okay, we're eventually going to need to figure out the rising tensions between the two main groups. Because let's not forget from floor 5, Kirito still has the rally flag, which he has said he won't give to... He won't overpower one guild by just giving it over. So he has said beforehand that if he gets a second rally flag, then he'll just give them for free, basically, to each of the groups. But now they have this sword, which is apparently just as powerful as an item. So he kind of decides that, okay, whichever guild does better in the boss fight, I will offer the opportunity to buy one of the items. So basically, you get to choose the rally guild flag or the fancy sword from the casino, and you can buy it from me for basically the amount of money we put in tokens to get it in the first place. So he tries to be really fair about it. And then the team that doesn't do it can buy the other one for basically the same price. So it's a really fair way to give both sides a very powerful item, but different items. So interesting dynamic going in. And it means that both sides are actually kind of trying to be very kind of fair about it, because they're aware that they can't try to like overly outdo each other, because they have to just work effectively as a team to actually beat the boss. I think the coin flip for who's the leader of the boss, the overall team, goes for Lind is the overall leader. Kabao isn't a problem during the battle. And then it's sort of like Lind, but Kirito and a little bit of Asuna are able to kind of give out orders as well, because they're just, you know, some of the best players, of course. The main thing that happens in all of this is pretty much just that they connect a few dots here of like the random plant that Argo talked about in one of the early scenes from Volume 7 that gave them like a fire resistance debuff comes in very handy for this boss fight, and Argo hands it out to everyone before the fight. So the fire breath is not actually as much of a problem as it otherwise would have been. The trick is that for the 6th health bar, the dragon actually launches up into the air and starts flying. And so this change is that everyone thinks the change is going to be that the dragon's gaze will affect all players, not just under 20. So they look away, and as they're looking away, the dragon flies up. And as they look up to see it flying, it activates its gaze. Now, it still doesn't affect the players over 20, it's just like normal. But it means that a lot of the team is out of action for a little bit, and they take heavy damage from a big fire attack from the sky. So this is a little bit of a chaotic moment. It's not super dramatic, like there's a few players on like 30% health, but most of our main characters, like I think Argo is the lowest at 50, but Kirito still has like 70% health. But they realize that with a lot of the other players down to 30, they are kind of in trouble here because it's up in the sky and so on. So this is when Nirnir, with very low HP, I think 5% HP, wakes back up. She's like, Kirito, give me my grandfather's sword. He hands it over to her, and she fires off one attack with it. And it basically cuts one of the wings off, cuts one of the dragon's arm off, and I think brings it back to the ground more or less. Doesn't finish the fight. Nirnir collapses and is on the verge of dying because I suppose she put a little bit more of her energy than she needed to into doing this, and it hasn't finished the fight. So this forces Kirito to do something quite dramatic, which is, Nirnir, drink my blood. Because again, the only options are basically him or Asuna, really, who actually know that this is something that's going to be in play. And pretty much it has to be Kirito because he has the most health. So Kirito is forced into this situation. So she does bite into his neck and start to suck his blood. It's a kind of typical vampire thing. And effectively they just get across the idea that initially it's just doing enough to sort of keep her health at the same. Like it remains at 2. So it's basically +1, -1, +1, -1, +1, -1 type thing. and Kirito's health is falling as this is happening. This is when the healing crystal comes into play. Asuna activates it to heal Kirito, so he goes back up to 100, and at this point, slowly, Nirnir's health begins to go back up to normal. Starts to go up, but the poison debuff is still there, because she still needs Dragon Blood to get rid of that. But what happens here is that Kirito now kind of relays to the audience effectively what he was told about the exact details and properties of the casino sword, which is that it is a weapon meant to be used by a vampire, so it does have a negative effect if used by a non-vampire. So they sort of established that like it's super powerful in that it's got really high stats. It has a poison immunity thing. It's got the big thing, critical hit, almost like guaranteed on every hit type situation. They established that if it's used by a non-vampire, it will drain your experience points. Now, the book doesn't really describe what exactly that necessarily means, but I'm guessing continued use would mean you actually go down levels. So you'd actually like de-level yourself over time. The extent to which it's like how serious it is isn't really got into, but no one wants to do that in a game where it's life and death, and going up a level is quite significant. But because Kirito has just had his blood sucked out by a vampire, he has also effectively been debuffed to be a vampire. So he uses the sword at full power and makes 2 quick attacks, because it's a double-handed sword, it's not a one-handed sword. And he basically just does 1, 2, cross attack, obliterates the boss, so the boss immediately dies. And they basically almost like from there smash cut to the scene on the beach that I talked about a little bit earlier on. And it's at nighttime because, of course, Kirito is a vampire now, so they can't have it during the day or he would burn up. So they do establish that the Kirito being a vampire thing is like a permanent thing until they can figure some way to change him back. Not even Nirnir, who is saved, some of the loot from the dragon dying is vials of dragon blood, and so she has enough for basically the next however long she needs. She doesn't even know how to get rid of the curse of being a dragon. She does explain, like in her family lineage, that okay, her grandfather was a vampire, she was one, but like her parents weren't. The other kind of side of the family also, most of them weren't, and that a lot of the, in a way, jealousy between the two families who run the casino is because she is effectively immortal and the main guy is very fearful about basically a low lifespan. And there's a bit of a plot point in the middle about he's sort of working with the fallen elves to try and find some way to increase his lifespan. But again, the setup on the Dark Elf side of things is pretty minimal. They pretty much just get across the idea that they could have either had a chance to get the keys back on this floor, but Nirnir has to die because they can't do her quest. But Kismail actually steps in and says, no, we have to do this now. There'll be chances on the upcoming floors to get the keys back. So that's kind of the main Kismail involvement in the book. There's a little bit of a thing with the regards to like a magical map that allows them to communicate with the fallen elves from a distance. But for the most part, that's the main thing there. So that's the situation here. The stuff with the guilds and the whole like buying the special items off them, they basically decide that, okay, the end of the fight was a little bit of a disaster. We weren't really that much help. We're actually okay with letting you wait until the next floor boss fight to make your decision. And that feels fair because it was basically both guilds working perfectly fine, and then it fell apart for basically everyone at the same time in the boss fight. So Kirito couldn't really make a valid decision. So it sets up that maybe on the next floor, floor 8, the boss there might allow one guild or another to actually be a little bit better. So that's good. But obviously it means we end the volume with Kirito with this kind of permanent debuff kind of type thing of like, they do establish that there are buffs associated with being a vampire, and there are debuffs associated with it, in that he obviously can't handle silver. So they basically say that the sort of metal money, that he can't use that. He won't be able to use silver weaponry during all of this. He's going to have to only act at nighttime now as well. They do say he has sort of like enhanced nighttime vision, so that's something useful. And basically that there's maybe some hope that some of the elf stuff on the next floor or the floor above that might have some answers to him, but the book doesn't really try to tell you how it will be dealt with. But if you've played an RPG yourself, say like Skyrim, you know that there is some sort of quest line that you can do to remove being a vampire from yourself. Or if it's the whole kind of lycanthropy thing for werewolves, you can do that as well. So I'm assuming there'll be some quest line along the way that Kirito will have to do. It's actually a little bit of an interesting dynamic to have, because it feels like, wait, we didn't hear about this before. Well, because there's so many gaps in what Kirito and co actually get up to during most of Aincrad, this can absolutely be a thing for a couple of floors, no problem, without it ever really needing to come up. So I'm guessing within the next couple of volumes we will deal with this. I'd be surprised if we get to, say, like floor 10 and he isn't cured of it already. Just because I can't see them interrupting what might be a rather dramatic floor with Kirito's a vampire kind of plot point. But, you know, that's most of what goes on here. There's a nice little moment with Asuna where right at the end she's kind of like, she feels sorry for Kirito that he had to do this, and he's now going to kind of suffer a little bit for what goes on. And she's kind of like, okay, make me a vampire too. But Nir talks her out of it, and it's kind of like, no, you two are kind of like a partnership. It's better that you have someone who can act during the day. That way, sort of, she can protect Kirito and vice versa. So it's going to be a bit interesting. The dynamic between the two of them is actually going to, I suppose, change a little bit. Beyond that, like in terms of Kirito, Asuna relationship type moments, there's nothing super serious that happens. There's a lot of kind of fun, kind of, you know, cute moments that happen, of course, like them wearing the kind of fancy clothes and stuff like that. Kirito, in the scene at the end on the beach, does actually just directly say that Asuna is beautiful. So that's something. She does hate him for that, but he says it. Beyond that, you know, like I said, it was just the kind of like Asuna actually kind of like wanting to kind of share the pain in a way with Kirito being a vampire, but nothing about, like, you know, the future of their partnership that sometimes gets alluded to or anything like that. So, you know, it was pretty focused on the plot of the floor overall. So in regards to what I think is going to happen going forward, obviously the teaser for the next volume is that it will be, I think Kawahara says it in the afterword, it's going to be, can he clear floor 8 doing night only runs. So that's going to be tricky for him and Asuna to manage, while also doing the L4 quest line as well. So that will come back into play in the next volume also. But he does also tease that there's a lot of questions related to what's going on with the family history of the vampires and all this sort of stuff. So obviously whenever Kirito finds a cure, I'm guessing he's going to want to come back to Nirnir and tell her or get advice from her about what's going on. So we're going to come back to floor 7 because it's kind of the vampire floor now, I guess, and deal with some of that stuff. The other thing, of course, is that Kirito is now going to need human blood or dragon blood, but thankfully they have vials of dragon blood from defeating the dragon, so that shouldn't be a problem. But I feel they're going to maybe play with the idea of that. Like, I think, you know, even if it's just for a comedy scene, there's gonna be some sort of a thing where, like, Kirito kind of teases Asuna with sucking her blood out or something like that. I can't see them avoiding that potentially humorous situation. So there's that. And then the thing with the monster that Kirito saved is that they reveal that the reason the two clans, effectively, that run the casino are able to capture monsters and control them like that is because it is a vampire power. Now, They established that even though a lot of members of the family are not vampires themselves, they still inherited this specific power, which is why it works on both sides. But it is a power associated with being a vampire. So I'm guessing Kirito might actually be able to use this to have a connection with the monster animal, which effectively I think is sort of meant to be a sort of Aincrad version of a werewolf. And in a lot of sort of mythology, like werewolves and vampires do have a decent connection, I believe. So I think they're maybe establishing that like he might be able to go back and temporarily have this silver, the storm wolf thing as a pet for at least a while he is a vampire. I'm guessing. Just because they've set up so clearly that vampires have this power to control, tame monsters like that. So I'm assuming that will come into play. But yeah, overall, there are my thoughts on Sword Art Online Progressive Volume 8. Like I said at the start, I hope we have more volumes that are not like two volumes on one floor, that we can get back to at least occasional floors where it's just one and done. Because I think we need to make progress for sure, and focus in on key floors as having more focus and attention being placed on them. I don't think every floor from here on out should be a two-parter, but plot points are beginning to build up in that, like, we have Elf War quest line. Now we have the whole plot of Kirito needs to remove the kind of, I suppose, being a vampire debuff from himself. So, you know, maybe for the next while we'll have a few 2-3 part floors. But if we are continuing this into like floor 10, 11, 12, 13 onwards, I definitely think there should be a few floors, like say 11, 12, 13, that maybe should go back to being one and done. But in the comments, let me know what your thoughts are on Volume 8, if you've read it already, or if you have any questions or thoughts in the comments. Other than that, that's been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.